Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Be Authentic podcast with Georgie Girl. I have Danica Martin here with me today, and she is the founder and principal coach, of Danica Designs. So, welcome, Danica. We're so glad to have you, and I believe you're talking about the 6 types of working genius. So, welcome.
Thank you, Georgie. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to hear what you have to say, and I can't wait to record this and publish it out so that others can hear this as well.
Awesome.
So, what are some of the things that you are doing with the 6 types of working genius?
Well, the 6 types of working genius, maybe I'll start with a bit of a background, high level view of the model itself. It was developed by Pat Lencioni. So Lencioni, many of you will know is the he's the guru of teamwork, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. He's got a lot of books and tools and resources about how teams function in a positive way. And when I was still working in my role with a school authority here in Alberta, I happened upon this model, and it really resonated with me because, unlike a lot of other assessment tools and sort of frameworks and models, this one is really about, the kind of work that brings people joy in their jobs and their daily tasks. We all have to work in some capacity or another. And wouldn't it be nice if we could learn about what brings us joy and kind of be able to sort of work together with our teams and our workplaces to leverage each other's areas of joy and genius in their work. So, long story short, the model involves 6 working geniuses. And so they are wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And what I've done with teams and individuals is given them the opportunity to do a quick assessment. It's a 10 to 15-minute assessment. And the assessment produces a report for the clients that outlines 2 areas of genius, 2 areas of competency, and 2 areas of frustration. So, of those 6 geniuses, we all have all 6. We all have competency or capability to exist in all 6 areas. But really, when we get the results and we start to reflect on them, we're able to really hone in on, those 2 areas of genius. That's where your bucket is filled in your workday. The time flies. You get into a flow and into a zone, and it doesn't feel like work. So for me, my geniuses are invention and discernment. So, if I'm creating or if I've got a pile of data in front of me and my job is to sort of dig through it and discern themes from that data, I am a happy camper and the day flies. And I mean, if I could do that work all day, every day, that would be the perfect job for me. And so, this is the advantage of this model. It really allows people to reflect within a framework and with some guidance around, what are those tasks that bring you joy? And, just to extend it a little bit, when I work with people on this and work with teams, I really encourage people to think about, their work day or their work week and try to be strategic about how to plan their tasks. So, for example, could you leave Friday afternoon for tasks that are in your working geniuses so that when you go home for the weekend, you're going home on that high and in that flow and in that zone and feeling good about your work life. And, there's just some strategies like that we can talk about as we dig into someone's results with this model.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I was looking at the 6 types,
Mm.
and I'm thinking that I'm probably an enablement. I like to make things happen. And I think it's tenacity that I take things to the finish line. But I'm
Mhm.
curious to know, and I'm hoping you can dig deeper with each of the 6 types of the working genius, because
Mhm.
you've spoken of a few, but
Yeah.
I'm hoping we can dig into the others.
For sure. And it's funny that you identified immediately with enablement and tenacity. You know, a lot of people, especially people in education or in the helping professions, have enablement and tenacity as their geniuses. And so that makes perfect sense that you were drawn to those, of course. But
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Let's go through all six. So, you know, starting at sort of the top, wonder is the genius of wondering. It's that genius that lives at 30,000 feet. You know, your wanderers are the people who ask big questions. They ask why? Why are we doing it this way? You know, what is the purpose of this? What is the end goal? What's the vision? Where do we want to head? Right? They're kind of, um, you know, poking the bear within the system or the organization and really thinking big. They're visionaries. They're way up in the clouds, asking those big why questions. And then we've got our inventors, and the inventors come along and they kind of, you know, take the question that the wanderer has asked or the vision that the wanderer is exploring, and they start to tease it out and create an idea or a directive or an initiative based on that wondering. And they love to, you know, have a whiteboard marker and a plain whiteboard and just start to brainstorm ideas. You know, they love to draw things, for me it's visuals. I love to create visuals to bring ideas together. You know, they're the ones who come up with the ideas.
Mhm.
And then we've got our discerners. So, you know, they're, you know, 20,000 feet. If the wanderer's at 30, the discerner's at about 20,000 feet. And they really play the role of taking the ideas that the inventor puts forward and really asking questions about them. You know,
Mm.
have you thought about this? Or, you know, what about this barrier that might come into play if we put that initiative forward? Or, you
Mhm.
know, this organization has these kinds of processes. How would that align with it? Right. So they, you know, they're not, their role isn't to pick it apart in a negative way, but their role is to really discern the idea, you know, with the goal of making it the best idea that it can be before it gets put forward into implementation.
Right.
And then we have our galvanizers. And so the galvanizers, you know, once it's an idea or a project or a plan has gone through those first three stages, the galvanizers are the cheerleaders. They're going to rally the troops behind this idea. They're going to be out there saying, you know, rah, rah, we've got a new curriculum to implement. Let's go, people. We love it, right? We're all excited about
Yes.
it. And, you know, here's why this is important. So they're, you know, more than just cheering for the sake of cheering, they're able to speak to the why. Why is this idea going to get us to our end result or get us closer to our goal? Why is this important that we get on board with this? And then, of course, you know, we already alluded to enablement and tenacity. The enablers, you know, now we're at the implementation phase of a project or a program or an initiative. The enablers come alongside, elbow to elbow. How can I support you? We're doing this. It's happening. What do you need? How do I support? Right? And they're often coming alongside people to support before the other person even knows that they need help or support. So there's an
Mm.
anticipatory nature to that enablement genius. Um, and you know, the tenacity genius, of course, those are the people with the to-do lists. They've got sticky notes everywhere. They're crossing things off. They're getting things done. You know, they want to push that project to fruition. They want to meet those deadlines, and they want to help, you know, take it across the finish line, so to speak.
Hmm. No, thanks for sharing that. And as you spoke, I do feel it's the enablement and tenacity for me for sure. Now, in thinking that, does I'm thinking of personality styles too, because this actually can work with personalities. And do you find sometimes with, in our working field, we're all different. We all have different styles and whatnot, different geniuses. Do you feel that sometimes there's frustrations with people who do not understand the other person's genius, working genius?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, when I work with teams about this, we talk about that. And first of all, we talk about how this assessment, unlike some personality assessments, this one is really 80% productivity,
Yes.
20% personality. So, you know, I'm thinking of an example in my professional career when I was in a school authority. You know, we were bringing two teams together into one team. And
Right.
this assessment allowed us to do that in a really safe way because it was about productivity and not necessarily about personality. So people were able to step away a little bit from the results, and it wasn't necessarily so personal. Of course, you can't, as you said, you can't separate that necessarily entirely. But we do talk about with teams, this concept of guilt and judgment, right? Feeling guilty for not having a genius area in a certain area. I can think of an example of a school administrator who I did this assessment with, and she felt guilty that her results were not wonder and invention because
Mm.
she's in a leadership role in the school, and she had this idea that that was supposed to be her area of genius. As we dug into it, she happened to be the only staff member in her whole school who had galvanizing as a genius. And so as soon as we broke that down, she was able to see, oh yeah, that's that happens to be in this situation what my staff needs, right? And what I can bring to the table. So we look at what's called a team map when we do it with a team, and we map out everybody's geniuses and frustrations. And so we can start to talk about team strengths, team gaps. We can start to talk about people's roles, and can we do some shifting on our team to leverage each other's geniuses. But we always come back to this concept of guilt and judgment, and not feeling guilty for lacking geniuses, but also not judging others for not having them, because we remind people that in any job you have to do all six. Like tenacity is one of my frustrations, but I have to-do lists all over my desk, and I have to be tenacious sometimes, and I have to finish things. I just wouldn't want to do that 100% of my time all day. It would drain me.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so, we all have to do all six, and all six are required for any project to be implemented and, taken across that finish line. So it's not a situation where wonder is more important than tenacity. They're all equally important in an organization and on a team, and in work that we're doing.
Hmm. So when you're building a team or talking about this in regards to team, are you hoping that there's a person that has like not all six, but if you have six people in a team, are you hoping that each one brings one of those geniuses to the table, or is it better to have several different ones?
Um, well, I don't know if I can, generalize a
Yeah.
judgment statement there, but what I will say is when we look at a team map, we look for that. We look for the spread across the geniuses, and
Mhm.
we look for the spread across the frustration. So we look for gaps. If there's nobody with galvanizing as a genius, um, there might be some people who have galvanizing as a competency area. And so then
Okay.
you start to talk about how can you fill that gap. We also talk about if there's a gap on your team's map, is there someone on another team in your organization who has that genius that you could draw in for those times when you need that part of the implementation process or that part of the conversation to be around the table? We also talk a lot about looking at in a team situation, where is the leader? So what are the leaders' geniuses, and what are the leaders' frustrations, and how does that show up on your team? So, sometimes in a conversation, I can think of a team that I was on where our leader was a capital T tenacity genius, right? He had two geniuses, but capital T was definitely one of them. And often, we would be in strategic planning conversations, or we would be in sort of that 30,000 foot conversation. And his tendency would be to bring us down to, what color handout should we print this on? What color paper should we print it on? And we hadn't even written the plan yet, right? And so we call that altitude sickness when we think about working geniuses, because people can draw you down. And Pat himself, he's an invention genius. He has a tendency to draw people up, right? So the
Yeah.
opposite is true. If we're at the end of an implementation, and Georgie's coming along to take us to the finish line, it's not the time to say, I wonder if we picked the right topic here. Maybe we should rethink our vision. Like, no, that's not the right time, right?
Yeah.
So, like any model like this, what's most valuable is the team having the shared language and the shared understanding. That's more important in my mind than having a perfectly balanced team map. I have done this a lot of times with teams, and I have yet to see, what we would describe as a perfectly balanced team map. There's always some gaps or one lonely person, in this area, and a whole list of enablers down here, and then one inventor. So we talk about that as well. You can't leave the one inventor alone to do all the inventing. We have to figure out how to work together on that.
Yeah, for sure. No, this is interesting work. So, how did you come about? Like you said, that it kind of came to you, and what drew you to this kind of work with the working geniuses?
hmm Well, I think I've always had a passion for teams, right? And effective teams and leading teams and understanding the dynamics of teams. And a colleague had taken the training in this model, and it just really resonated with me. And so I took the certification program and really dug into it, and have since then implemented it with teams that I've worked with, but also other teams and other organizations. And I just see the response to it as um, it really seems to resonate with people, and people respond very positively to it. And I think it's that combination of, looking at the team as a whole and not talking about each other's personalities in the same way that some of those other assessments, like the colors or the MBTI, great assessment tools, but a little bit more interwoven with who you are as a person, right?
Right,
Where this one is the ability to say, I may not love tenacity, but I can do it, right? But I
right.
I love invention and discernment. It's not about really who I am as a person so much.
Yes, yes. Well, when you were speaking, and I admire people who have the genius of wonder and ask, questions and come up with some great ideas and whatnot. And I think that we can all grow in each of these areas.
hmm
It may not be like you said, tenacity. You get drained from tenacity sometimes, and I could see that. But I think we can grow in all of these areas and make stronger teams because of that, for sure.
hmm hmm Yeah, and it's that shared understanding and that willingness to really see who we are as a team
Mhm.
beyond who I am as an individual in this school or in this business or in this organization. Who am I as part of this whole team,
Right.
right?
Yes. I appreciate this package you had given me. Now you talk a little bit about responsive and versus disruptive. Can you
hmm
talk a little bit about that with us?
For sure. So three of the geniuses are responsive, and you've got the sheet in front of you. I don't, so correct me if I'm mistaken here, but it's
Okay.
wonder,
Sure.
discernment, and enablement are the responsive geniuses. And so those geniuses are responding to something sort of external. So wonder responds to the larger societal context, trends in the field, research. They're sort of responding to those big ideas that they've heard about or that are coming from outside of their small team. The discerners, of course, are responding to the inventor's invention. So they're responding to that idea and kind of discerning it. And then the enablers are responding to the galvanizer, sort of rallies the troops. The enablers respond by coming in with that support. And then the other three geniuses are called disruptive, which kind of has a negative connotation, but it's not meant to be negative. It's really about disrupting something in the organization in order to get to implementation or get the project through to fruition, keeping in mind that this model of course originates in business, and Pat does a lot of work with businesses. So in fields like education or social services it's a little bit different, but still, if you think about planning an assembly or an event, you can go through all six geniuses and see how that work maps itself out. So inventors, galvanizers, and tenacity geniuses are making a change, implementing something, throwing an idea out there into the organization that kind of disrupts the current pattern or the current way of doing things, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. No, it does. Okay. Well, and then you also talk a little bit about guilt and judgment, and you alluded to that already.
Mhm.
Um, do you see a lot of when you talk with different teams? Do you see a lot of the guilt and judgment when you do the assessments?
I think it's people's natural tendency because there's preconceived ideas of what I should have as my geniuses because I'm in this role.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes people are right, and sometimes their results come back slightly differently than what they expected. Um, some facilitators give people the results of their assessment before they go over the model overview, but I like to go over the model first and then give the results. And so I do get people who've already picked their geniuses as they listen to me talk about the model, and then they get their results. And sometimes it's aligned, and sometimes they're a little bit shocked. I've probably done several hundred of these with different clients, and I've really only had one person who really her results really rubbed at her, and so we dug into it a little bit deeper, and I have a tool for people to dig into their results a little bit deeper. But most people, once they really think about what the results mean and read the description of those geniuses in further detail, um, they come to really see how, yeah, that resonates. And especially if you're sitting at a table with your team members or in a room and you've got team members saying, no, actually that is you, right? You've got team members starting to say, actually, you might not notice that about yourself, but that's what I see in you as a strength, right? So there's power in that too. But I think guilt and judgment are just such a natural tendency when we're high achievers, when we want to do well, when we want to, be right and be in the right position. And, so that's why that part of the sessions that I do is so important, because you really have to put a pin in that and put it to the side, because it's not serving any purpose.
Right. Right. For sure. Um, so then there's the altitude of geniuses. Can you
Mhm.
speak a little bit about the
Yeah.
altitude? I haven't got to this page, but it looks really interesting, and I'm curious about why they
Yeah.
picked the altitude.
Yeah. So, when I was talking about the different geniuses, I alluded to it a little bit, but, wonder is kind of at that 30,000 foot. If you think about a plane, the wanderers are talking about, they're the ones who say, I wonder where we should go on our trip, right? Where the tenacity people, they're landing the plane, they're opening the doors, they're cleaning the aisles, making sure everybody has their suitcases, right? And all the other geniuses kind of fall into place there. And so, coming back to that concept of altitude sickness, or, um, you know, flipping back and forth in the geniuses, when we talk about work or projects or implementation, there's three phases of work: ideation, that's your wanderers and your inventors; activation, that's your discerners and galvanizers; and implementation, that's your enablers and your tenacity. And any project, any event planning, any type of work that we do actually needs to go through all three of those phases and all six of the geniuses. And so, my example before, when you have a leader who's, a wanderer, and you're at the end of a project, the assembly is 5 minutes away, the chairs are set up, the PowerPoint's ready to go, and the wanderer comes along and says, I wonder if we picked the right topic for our assembly. Maybe we should talk about this instead. And the tenacity people are going,
Yeah.
no, we got the whole audience coming in 5 minutes. So that's where you have to be cautious as a team about not flipping up and down, and really kind of naming that we're going to talk through this in a progressive manner. And and naming that right now we're at galvanizing, right now we're at enablement, right now we're at invention, helps the team to really think about that work in a cohesive manner.
Sure. Sure.
Mhm.
Um, I was just thinking here because people may wonder why I had asked you to come on a Be Authentic talk show or podcast per se. But I see that sometimes in our work field, we work with so many different people. And I truly believe with the working genius, we're better able to understand each other, and we're
Mhm.
better able to show and be authentic and show ourselves for who we are. And
Mhm.
it's interesting, like you said, some people are really surprised. I'd love the assessment because I'm curious to know now if my assessment would be as accurate as I think I am. But it's
Mhm.
something that we can all look at and reflect upon to see how sometimes why we act the way we do or think the way we do, and versus why other people, like in our workforce, may think the way they do as well. So this is
Mhm.
really interesting work.
Yeah, it builds that shared understanding, but I'd go one step further and say it allows people to advocate for themselves as well and for their own needs in the workplace, right? So if we think about work that brings you joy, work that fulfills you, that authentic, honoring who I am and advocating for what I need, this kind of tool provides you with that information. And, Pat Lencioni will talk about people who have left positions or left organizations after doing this assessment because they've realized that their job lives over here, but their geniuses live over here, and never the twain shall meet. And so they've gone out to seek out a role that aligns better with their genius areas. And so, I mean, that's a pretty drastic example, but that, when I think about being authentic and being true to oneself and um, maximizing joy and minimizing angst and stress and all of those things that drain us, this is just one tool, that you can use to sort of help yourself with that.
Yes, no, for sure, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, just thinking here, where are some places that you have gone to different organizations, if you can speak about it, because this work is really important, and I know you've been busy with it. So, where are
Mm-hmm.
some businesses that you've gone to?
Yeah, yeah, well, for sure. And my background is in education. So,
Yeah.
to be honest, at this point, I've worked with a lot of different school authorities.
Hmm.
I've done, a student services team. I've done senior leadership teams. I've done work with a whole administrator group. And then from there, in that particular school authority, I ended up doing all the school staffs over the course of about 18 months. Um, I've done individuals as well. I did some leadership coaching for Red Deer Polytechnic a few years ago, and I used this tool with a few of my coachees and some of my other coaching clients. I've used it with individuals as well. You don't get the value of the team map, but they start to speculate about where their team members are. And in a couple of cases, I've ended up doing their teams as well. So, yeah, it's certainly hasn't been sort of my primary focus in my work. It's more of a tool that I use in supporting people that I'm working with. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And that's what
Yeah.
gravitated to me towards I just looking for some tools and strategies right now,
Yeah.
just in the workforce or in people's lives, and just learning more about themselves. And I
Hmm.
think that's really important. Well,
Hmm.
before we go, there's this missing and misusing working genius. So tell
Hmm.
me a little bit more about missing and misusing.
Hmm. So that aspect of the work I do with teams is really talking about, so let's start with missing. So when you look at a team map, if you have um, on a team map, we typically map the geniuses and the frustrations just to keep it clean. If we mapped everybody's all six geniuses, it would be a little too messy. So, for example, I'll go back to that example of the school administrator who, felt guilty because she didn't have wonder or invention as her geniuses, but she was the only galvanizer genius, and literally the rest of her staff had galvanizing as a frustration. So there weren't even, any competencies there. It was like one or the other. And so we talked about, that would be considered, almost a missing genius because you have only one person. Sometimes we see nobody with a genius in that particular area. And so we start to talk about, the tendency on teams sometimes is to fill that missing genius area with people who have it as a competency. So the danger there is that when you spend too much time in your competency areas, so if you think about it as sort of the traffic lights, right?
Mhm.
Green lights are your geniuses, yellow competency, red lights your frustration. Um, if you think about those yellow light competency areas, spending too much time there can really lead to burnout. That's where we see people burning out, feeling drained. And that's because, you have some talent at that. It doesn't frustrate you, but it doesn't fill your bucket either. So, it's kind of like if genius areas are your top of the line thermal coffee mug that keeps your coffee warm all day, frustrations are the Tim Hortons paper cup with a hole in the bottom. Competencies are that great mug you got from a student 5 years ago that you love, but your coffee's cold and
Right.
stale by recess, right? And so
Mhm.
if you translate that analogy to your work, you can imagine that if you spend most of your time in your competency areas, you're that cold, stale coffee, and you really start to feel drained. And
Mhm.
so we caution people not to fill their team map, by pulling in competency areas. Rather, look around in your organization at other teams. And, if you're doing a visioning activity, for example, and you have no wonderers, maybe you can bring in a wonderer from another team and give them some background and, let them sort of do their thing just for that part of your planning conversation, right? So sometimes it's about thinking beyond the walls of your own team.
Right.
Yeah. And misusing is very similar to missing, but it's really about pulling in those competency areas and also being cautious of, you know, um, well, that's Georgie's genius. So Georgie is doing all of those tasks for the rest of time for our whole organization. Well,
Mhm.
that's a misuse of your genius too,
Right.
right?
Right. I can see how this can build capacity in people, though.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
it's a foundation. It's a starting point to build the capacity within the teams for sure.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I just flipped to the next page too, and there's the team diagnostic, and it's the team strengths and team challenges. So I kind of liked some of the frustrations. I don't like the frustrations, but it's interesting to read the frustrations with certain working geniuses. But can you explain a little bit? Just like I
Hmm.
don't know. I have the sheet in front of me, you don't, but it's like the wonder, and then it talks about the strengths, the genius ponders possibilities, the frustration is too
Yeah,
busy to notice.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And so, with every one of the six geniuses, if you have, a lot of people in that area, then your team is going to show some strengths, right? If you have a lot of galvanizers, you're going to have a lot of enthusiasm in the organization about ideas. You're going to have a lot of buy-in. Right? But if you're lacking in galvanizers, it's sort of the opposite is true, right? You're going to have a harder time getting that buy-in. People might not understand why new ideas are coming their way. And so, yeah, as part of that conversation about understanding ourselves and then understanding our team, we talk about, that piece and what are the strengths and stretches of your team based on your team map and your profile. Yeah.
Yes. Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Danica. I
Oh, you're
really
so welcome.
appreciate this. Yeah, and I'm writing and jotting down some ideas, so something I can take back to my work and do a little bit
Yeah.
of thinking with them as well. And be kind of interesting to have you join our school and see where we're at and do that
Mhm.
assessment on us. So,
Yeah, you bet. Well,
uh,
I will send you an assessment for yourself so you can do your
yeah,
own and
okay.
see what it's like.
Okay, sounds great. And thanks for being on our podcast. And we can find you at Danica Designs. And where else could we
Yeah.
find you?
On my website, danicadesigns.ca, there's links to Facebook, LinkedIn, um, Instagram. I do some social media postings. So that's where I am.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Georgie.
Yes, you're welcome.